The courtroom was packed but silent, as if every breath had been confiscated at the door. Chris Brown stepped in like a storm that refused to announce itself. He didn't wear a suit to impress or a face to perform. He walked with a weight that had nothing to do with fame and everything to do with the things he'd seen. Cameras weren't allowed inside, but the energy buzzing through the air suggested that millions were still watching just from outside the frame. The judge gave a brief nod, the bailiff gestured, and Chris took the stand. He sat slowly, not like a man reluctant to speak, but like one finally ready to stop pretending. His eyes scanned the room, lingering briefly on Diddy. The man sat behind his defense table like a monument, unmoving, unreadable. Chris didn't wait for a question. He raised his hand. The oath barely finished when he spoke, his voice neither loud nor shaken, but weighted with memory. "I was there that night," he said. The words dropped like a gavel. A quiet murmur stirred across the rows of press and spectators before the judge raised a finger and the room folded back into silence. Chris leaned in, his hands gripping the wood of the witness stand. "I saw things," he continued, "things I wish I hadn't, things I didn't talk about because I thought silence would protect me. But it didn't. It protected him. It protected Diddy. And I'm not doing that anymore." The room shrunk around those words. He didn't flinch when he said them. He didn't blink when his eyes met Diddy's. If anything, he seemed to draw strength from that stare, as if looking directly at the monster gave him control of his own fear. Chris took a breath, one that sounded like it had been held for years. "I remember a night," he began, his voice dropping slightly. "One night that's haunted me. There was a girl, I won't say her name. She was young, new, full of dreams. She came with her boyfriend. He was so proud to be invited. But somewhere during the night, she vanished, disappeared. Her boyfriend kept asking around. No one had answers. But I saw her. I saw Diddy lean in, whisper something to her, and then nod to one of his men. She looked scared, hesitant, but she followed him, like she didn't think she had a choice. That was the last time I saw her that night." His jaw clenched. That wasn't the first time, and it wasn't the last. Diddy had a way of making people feel like saying no to him was saying no to the entire industry, and most of them didn't feel like they had the luxury to say no, especially the women. They weren't just guests at those parties, they were selected, like casting calls. He paused, as if waiting for someone to interrupt. No one did. Not the judge, not the prosecutor, not even Diddy's attorney, who sat stone-faced but clearly listening. Chris's eyes darkened. "I saw things," he repeated. "Girls being led into rooms only he had the keys to. Rooms no one asked questions about. They came with agents, publicists, friends, and by the end of the night, they were just gone. Changed, or missing entirely." His voice hardened. "And the worst part? Everyone knew. We just didn't talk about it. We told ourselves it was just part of the game, just the price of fame." He leaned in again, almost whispering now. "There was this one room. They called it the Velvet Room, not because of how it looked, but because of how it felt. Quiet, heavy, like sound itself couldn't get in or out. That's where it happened. That's where the lines disappeared. That's where Diddy stopped pretending." His fingers curled tighter around the stand. "I was in that room once. I wish I hadn't been. I didn't see everything, but I saw enough. Enough to know it wasn't a party, it was a stage, and we were all cast without consent. Chris's voice cracked just slightly, but he recovered quickly. That girl, she wasn't the only one. I've seen so many walk into that house with hope in their eyes and leave looking like they'd been hollowed out, like something had been taken and no one would talk about it. He looked directly at the jury now. And we let it happen. We saw it, we felt it, but we smiled, toasted champagne, and posted pictures. Every like, every comment, every retweet, we were part of it. We told him he was untouchable. His tone was sharper now, but no one is untouchable forever. He sat back for a moment, breathing deeply as if releasing part of what he had carried for years. Diddy didn't just throw parties. He curated control. If your name was on the list, it was because he wanted you there. If it wasn't, you didn't exist. And once you were in, you knew the rules. Phones were taken, NDAs were signed, security at every door, smiles everywhere. But underneath, fear. That's what it was. Fear. And he fed on it. He built an empire on it, and we helped him. Chris leaned in once more. I helped him by saying nothing, by pretending I didn't see what I saw, by letting myself believe it wasn't my place. His voice dropped to almost a whisper, but it was. It always was. He looked down briefly, his breath steady but heavy. I remember a girl, barely 21. Gold dress, nervous smile. She came with friends. One moment she was there, the next she was gone. I asked around. Nobody saw her leave, but I did. I saw her walk behind one of Diddy men. I saw the look in her eyes. She wasn't excited. She wasn't drunk. She was scared. And I still did nothing. The courtroom was silent. Not even the court reporter moved. Every person in that room was holding their breath. Chris looked up again, his face softer but more resolute. That's why I'm here. Not to redeem myself, not to tear him down, but to tell the truth, because I should have spoken years ago. And maybe, just maybe, if I had, some of those girls wouldn't have vanished. His final words echoed through the room like a siren through fog. I saw him. I saw Diddy take her. And I stayed silent. But not anymore. The judge didn't say anything. The defense didn't move. And Diddy didn't blink. But something had shifted. Not just in the room, in the air, in the silence. Chris Brown had broken it. And now there was no going back. The hallway in that house wasn't long, but it felt like it stretched into something darker than any room should ever lead to. Chris remembered every step like it was carved into the soles of his shoes. The house was one of Diddy rental estates, hidden in the hills above Los Angeles, a fortress wrapped in luxury, surrounded by guards and silence. That night, it was supposed to be a birthday party for a record executive, but as always, once Diddy entered, it stopped being about anyone else. The mood changed. Music shifted. People stiffened, not obviously, but like their bodies instinctively recognized they were no longer free to breathe the same way. Chris had arrived late, walking in just in time to see Diddy signal to his assistant across the room. It was always subtle. A tilt of the chin, a glance held a second too long, and the machine would start moving. The girl stood out because she didn't fit the room's rhythm. She was too young, too alert, too full of that raw hope that hadn't yet been replaced by survival instinct. Her dress shimmered under the dim lights, but her eyes betrayed something else. She clutched her glass like it was armor, her gaze darting toward the exits like she was searching for one that hadn't been locked. Chris noticed her because he recognized that look. He'd seen it before, too many times, and he had ignored it every time. This time, something in him paused. He saw Diddy look at her. Just one glance, then the nod, then the approach. One of the assistants leaned in and said something to her. She shook her head. Her lips moved. No. It was small, but definite. The assistant leaned again, more insistent this time. Chris couldn't hear the words, but he didn't need to. He knew the script. The girl looked around, eyes wide, heart racing. No one helped. No one moved. Then she stopped resisting. Her shoulders dropped. She was led away. And Chris stood there, 10 feet away, frozen by his own shame. He knew what that hallway meant. Everyone did. It was the unspoken edge of every party. You didn't go down it unless you were chosen, and you didn't come back the same. Chris took a step forward. Just one. A weak, half-hearted step, as if his body wanted to move, but his fear grabbed his ankles. He remembered looking around, hoping someone else would intervene, someone older, someone braver. But no one did. They all turned their faces, raised their glasses, changed the subject in their heads. Chris remembered thinking, maybe she's just going to lie down. Maybe she's tired. Maybe it's not what it looks like. But it always was. That hallway had no exit signs, only whispers and regret. And Diddy always walked behind them, never ahead, like a shadow escorting something he already owned. Chris stood there for another 15 minutes, hoping to see her return. She didn't. He left before the sun came up, walked out of the house without saying goodbye to anyone, got into his car and sat there in the driveway until his hands stopped shaking. That was the night something changed in him. The night he couldn't tell himself the lies anymore. The night the silence stopped feeling like survival and started feeling like complicity. He didn't go to the next party, or the one after that. The invitations still came. The messages were polite at first, then distant, then gone. People stopped calling. His name stopped appearing in playlists. Interviews were canceled. His label pushed back his release. No one said anything outright. No threats, no blacklists in writing. Just a slow, cold freeze, like stepping into a room that used to be warm and realizing the heat had been turned off permanently. Chris knew what it meant. He was being taught a lesson. You don't walk away from Diddy, not without consequences. That's how power worked. Not with fists, but with absence. You disappear from relevance. Your voice echoes into nothing. But Chris had something left. Memory, guilt. The image of that girl being led into the dark. Her lips whispering, "I don't want to go." And Diddy hand, resting casually on the small of her back like he was guiding furniture. That image followed him, into sleep, into the studio, into silence. He tried to drown it, with distractions, with denial, with excuses, but it always returned. Until finally, the silence grew louder than the music. That's why he came to court. Not to be a hero, not to save anyone, but to bleed truth into a room that had bled silence for too long. He remembered the last thing she did before disappearing. She looked back, just once, briefly, at everyone, at anyone. Her eyes said what her mouth couldn't. "Please, see me." And nobody did, except him. That was the moment, the fracture in his soul, the wound that never closed. And that night, He promised himself if he ever got the chance to speak, he would, loudly, clearly, no matter the cost. In that courtroom, with Diddy sitting still like a statue of power, Chris wasn't testifying to bring a man down. He was trying to lift the weight off the silence he helped carry. The hallway still existed. The house still stood. The fear still pulsed through the industry like a dirty heartbeat. But his voice had finally broken through the walls. And maybe, just maybe, that was the first crack in something too long protected. Chris looked at the jury again. They weren't scribbling anymore. They were listening, breathing him in like oxygen after a storm. He leaned forward slightly, voice low but unflinching. "I've waited years to say this," he said. "That night wasn't about a party. It wasn't about fun. It was about power, about erasure, about a girl whose name I don't even know, but whose eyes won't let me sleep. That hallway ends here." The courtroom didn't move, couldn't move. Chris had shifted the air, and from now on, nothing could pretend it hadn't heard. The prosecution didn't interrupt him. They didn't need to. Chris Brown's voice had become its own indictment. The weight of his words did what cross-examination never could. It made the walls breathe. It made the floor listen. But now, as he remained seated in the witness box, the room shifted. The defense attorney stood, slow, smooth, with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. He adjusted his tie, stepped forward like he was entering a Broadway stage he'd rehearsed on for years, and addressed the court. "Your Honor, may I proceed?" The judge gave a nod, and the lawyer turned to Chris with the ease of a man who thought truth could be outmaneuvered. "Mr. Brown, you've said a lot today," he began, his tone mild, almost paternal. "Powerful words, but this court deals in evidence, not emotion." He let that hang in the air like perfume in a locked room. Chris didn't respond. He just stared at him, steady, unmoved. So the lawyer continued. "You said you saw things, heard things, felt things, but how do we know those weren't memories distorted by time, by perception, by the pressure of the moment?" Chris leaned forward slightly. "Because I still see her face. And it's exactly the same as it was that night." The lawyer took a step closer. "You've had a complicated past, Mr. Brown. Public controversies, accusations. Some would say your reputation is his voice curled around the word fragile. Couldn't all this be a convenient redirection? A way to step back into the spotlight with a new image?" Chris nodded slowly, not flinching. "I've made mistakes," he said, "and I've owned them. But this isn't about redemption. This is about responsibility." There was no applause, just the quiet rhythm of breathing. The lawyer paced, hands behind his back like a professor in front of a failing student. "And yet you waited. All these years. You saw girls disappear, you say. You saw things you found disturbing. And yet you returned. Again and again. Why now, Mr. Brown? Why not then?" "Because I was afraid," Chris said without hesitation. "Afraid of what would happen if I walked away, if I spoke. The industry doesn't blacklist you with memos. It just erases you. You're gone before you can ask why." The lawyer raised a brow. "So you were complicit?" "Yes," Chris answered. "We all were." That stopped the lawyer, just for a second. He hadn't expected that answer, but he recovered. "And where are these women now, Mr. Brown? These victims? These ghosts you speak of? Why haven't they come forward themselves?" Chris's eyes burned. "Because they know what I know. That this system doesn't punish predators, it punishes survivors. That's why. The lawyer opened his mouth, then shut it. He turned to the judge. No further questions. Chris remained still, breathing, but barely moving. The judge looked at him, then gave a small nod. Mr. Brown, if you wish to offer any final remarks, you may. Chris didn't hesitate. He looked toward the jury, toward the judge, toward the press, and finally toward Diddy, who sat as still as ever, his jaw a line of concrete, his eyes unblinking. I didn't come here to destroy a man, Chris said. I came here because I helped protect one, and I needed to stop. Every time I stayed silent, I gave him permission, and I don't want to live with that anymore. I saw girls led into back rooms and I looked away. I told myself I couldn't prove anything, that it wasn't my place, but it was. I was 10 feet away, and I stayed silent. That silence made me guilty. The words came now like a river that had found the crack in the dam. There was a system around Diddy, not just bodyguards or lawyers, but a system of silence, of complicity, a system we all fed. The music industry, the media, the fans. Every time we laughed at his jokes, every time we reposted a party clip, every time we called it genius instead of grooming. Chris's voice dropped. There was a night, I haven't spoken about this one, until now. It was in New York, one of those rooftop after parties where nothing was on paper but everything was understood. I remember the girl because she was new, nervous. She was flown in from Brazil, didn't speak much English. I asked who brought her. She said, the man with the gold watch. Later that night, I saw her again, stumbling, alone, mascara running, one shoe missing. I tried to ask if she was okay, but security stepped in, said, she's fine, don't worry. Then they pulled her into the elevator. I never saw her again. That memory haunts me, because I didn't push. I didn't call anyone. I just poured another drink and convinced myself it wasn't my fight. He stared straight ahead. I was protecting a man who didn't need protection, who already had more power than anyone should ever be trusted with. And every time I smiled for a camera after one of those nights, I helped him hold on to that power, but not anymore. His hands gripped the stand. This trial isn't about me. It's about a hallway that led into silence, a hallway that swallowed girls whole and spit out secrets no one wanted to admit. And that hallway ends today, because now you've heard it, all of it, and none of us can pretend we didn't. Chris sat back, eyes forward, chest rising and falling. The courtroom didn't clap, it didn't shout, but something in the air cracked, like a glass dome had finally shattered. Diddy didn't move, but he didn't need to. Everyone could feel it. For the first time, his silence wasn't control, it was defense. And Chris had become the witness no one saw coming. The silence was finally over. The courtroom wasn't just quiet now, it was transformed, as if the very architecture had shifted under the weight of truth. No one breathed too loudly, no one shifted in their seats. Even the flickering lights above seemed to settle into stillness. Diddy didn't flinch. He sat unmoving behind the defense table, fingers folded tightly, jaw clenched so hard the muscles in his temples pulsed like a second heartbeat. But something had changed. Not on the surface, Diddy was too trained, too calculated, but in the energy surrounding him, in the way the jury leaned forward just slightly, not to catch words, but to feel them. They weren't just evaluating testimony anymore. They were absorbing something that felt ancient and forbidden. Chris Brown remained seated on the stand. His hands no longer trembled. His eyes no longer darted. The fear was still there, yes, but it had changed shape. It was no longer a muzzle. It was a weapon, and he was wielding it with something resembling grace and devastation. The judge shifted slightly in his chair, looked at Chris, and spoke for the first time in what felt like hours. "Mr. Brown, this court thanks you for your testimony. You may step down." But Chris didn't move. He remained seated, eyes still on Diddy, his voice low but deliberate. "Your Honor, with all due respect, there's one last thing I need to say." The judge hesitated, then gave a single nod. "Proceed." Chris inhaled deeply, the kind of breath you take before jumping into cold water, or telling someone you love them, or burying someone you didn't get to say goodbye to. "I want to talk about the night that ended it for me," he said. "The night I decided I wouldn't be silent ever again. It was in L.A. One of those private events, invite only, NDAs at the door, no cameras, not even in the lobby. They took your phone and your identity at the same time. Once you walked through those gates, you didn't belong to yourself anymore. You belonged to the fantasy Diddy created." He paused, letting the memory rise slowly, like something buried in water. "I remember the girl because she looked out of place. Not in the way she dressed, she looked perfect. That was the trick. They all looked perfect. But she moved like she was scared to breathe. She kept glancing at the exits, clutching her purse like it had secrets inside. She was standing near one of the lounge chairs when I first saw her. Just standing, still, like her body hadn't decided if it was going to stay or run. And then I saw Diddy see her. Chris's hands clenched slightly, his eyes narrowing. He didn't say anything. He just gave the look. The same look I'd seen a dozen times. The one that meant it had already been decided. One of his men approached her, whispered something. She shook her head. A reflex, a flicker of resistance. Then another man came over. They flanked her like choreography. She looked around. Her mouth moved. I think she said, "I'm not sure." But her voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be, because no one would have listened anyway. They took her wrist gently, like they were helping, like she had asked for it. But she hadn't. Her eyes begged, not for escape, not anymore, for acknowledgement, for someone, anyone to say they saw her. And I did. I saw everything. I was 10 feet away. I could have stopped it. I could have asked a question, drawn attention, created delay. But I didn't. I just stood there. And I watched. The hallway swallowed her. Diddy walked behind. Just like always. He never touched anyone publicly. He didn't need to. The house did it for him. The silence, the system. The collective shrug of everyone who didn't want to be the next person removed from the list. Chris's voice grew quieter now, but heavier. That was the night I left early, got in my car, didn't even wait to say goodbye. I sat in my driveway until sunrise. I told myself I'd never go back, and I didn't. But I also didn't speak, not until now. The jury was still. The judge leaned back slowly. Even the court reporter had stopped typing, her fingers hovering above the keys like she, too, didn't want to break the moment. Chris looked toward Diddy, his stare steady. "I don't hate you," he said quietly. "That would be too easy. Hatred gives people like you too much power. I just remember. I remember every room, every girl, every time I told myself it wasn't my fight. I remember the music stopping, the lights dimming, the way you smiled when everyone else tensed. I remember thinking you weren't a man. You were a system, a code people learned to follow without being taught." Chris shifted in his seat slightly, folding his hands in front of him. "I remember all of it. And I know you do too. That's why you haven't looked at me. Because you remember. And now, so does everyone else. That hallway? It doesn't end in darkness anymore. It ends right here. With this testimony, with these words, with this moment." He turned to the jury. "You can't unhear what you've heard. You can't unknow what's been spoken. I've carried this for years. I've watched people disappear. I've smiled for photos, knowing someone was crying in a back room. I've accepted awards while knowing I didn't deserve peace. But today, I let it go. I put it where it belongs, in the open, for the world to see. So maybe, just maybe, someone else won't feel alone next time. Maybe they'll speak sooner. Maybe someone will finally believe them." Chris stood now, slowly, his shoulders square, his voice clear. "This isn't about me. It's not about Diddy Combe. It's about a world that let him exist this long without consequence. It's about the girls who didn't get to leave the hallway. It's about the silence that should have ended years ago. But at least it ends today." He stepped away from the stand, walked toward the exit like a man walking out of a storm. Not clean, not whole, but free. The courtroom didn't move for several seconds. Then the judge nodded. The next witness may be called. But everyone knew the next words, whoever spoke them, would echo inside a different room. Because Chris Brown had said what no one else dared to say. And the walls, once thick with secrets, now trembled with truth.